The Exeter School exists to help children struggling with mental disability. While the school's purpose at conception was to serve noble purposes, eventually, the population became too large for the staff to manage each student appropriately. As a result, many students were mistreated, and the place of learning became a place for the imprisonment of mentally challenged children. Maltreatment continued until mortality rates at the school started to skyrocket, warranting the construction of a cemetery and crematorium at the facility. The place now hosts many horror stories and urban legends, as haunted grounds with vengeful spirits that are never to be disturbed. Modern-day Exeter is being transformed into something new. Patrick is volunteering to help Father Conway, who leads the project for Exeter's renovation. Patrick struggles to get into college, but Father Conway knows Patrick is not trying. Patrick is comfortable with his life already, unwilling to change. A comment by Father Conway also reveals Patrick's attachment to his friends. Father Conway sees excellent potential in Patrick, hoping that he finds his path to make something of himself. Father Conway leaves the conversation, now inspecting an eerie statue. He takes a good look at it, as he seems to notice something through the windows of the building. Patrick goes to Brian's place to pick him up. Brian is holding a movie as the two leave through the driveway. They talk to each other as they drive, with Patrick accidentally revealing that Exeter is empty for the weekend. Brian chooses it as the place for their party, with no authorities to disrupt their fun. Suddenly, the car hits someone, but the two leave the vehicle to find that it's Patrick's brother Rory playing a prank on them. Patrick tries to spit on him, but he gets up and starts playing around, reaching for Brian's movie. Meanwhile, Brian is on call, setting up the party at the Exeter renovation site. Despite Patrick's protest, he plans everything out, and they have a party for the night. People are partying and drinking while Patrick tries to control everything. Patrick goes after someone playing with fire, eventually stumbling into Brad and Amber, making love in Brad's car. Patrick cares deeply about what Father Conway thinks of him, constantly worrying about what might happen to the site before they resume work after the weekend. Drew walks over to the group, kissing Patrick and slightly creeping him out. Patrick and Brian then notice a girl bending over, examining her posterior like creeps. Patrick tries to make a move on the girl, helping her get a beer from a bathtub. He flirts with her, while the girl seems to flirt back for a bit. Patrick mentions his work with the church, until Brad and Brian take him away to scold him for mentioning it. Suddenly, the girl comes back into the conversation, about to leave. Patrick makes her stay, though, with the party raging the entire night. The following day, the building is completely trashed. Brian is recording as everyone is either passed out or doing. The girl from last night is still with them as Amber starts to talk about the spiritual world. No one takes her seriously, but Amber genuinely believes in such things. Brad and Patrick are playing darts together when Brad insinuates that the nameless girl from the party will be up for grabs if Patrick does not make a move. Patrick does not give a solid answer, but is considering what Brad says. Patrick goes to one of the bathrooms to take a leak. While he pees in the toilet, he inspects the stall, seeing graffiti and a glory hole. Suddenly, Rory startles him from behind, making him jump. Rory playfully fights with his brother using a plunger, until Patrick loses his temper and starts scolding him. Patrick appears stern, lecturing his brother to avoid dangerous substances. At the same time, Rory seems more free-spirited and carefree, and admits that his brother's lecture is too late. There is absolute chaos in the main corridor of the building as the party people are bowling, causing more and more havoc. Everyone seems to relax for a while, sitting on couches, as they have casual conversations about use and rehabilitation. Brad and the nameless girl share some banter when they all start talking about Exeter, calling it an asylum. Brian shares his knowledge about the place with everyone, while Rory gets sick and pukes in the corner of the room. Brian leads the conversation now, discussing Father Conway's intentions with the building. The church has owned the asylum for a long time, supposedly using it for brainwashing and experiments. Eventually, the conversation leads to the conspiracy theory that Conway intentionally burned the building down. However, Father Conway, in a news report, seems to blame the fire on demonic messages and rock music, and one child patient responsible for wreaking havoc inside the building. The nameless girls segue into a discussion of exorcisms, showing everyone a girl on YouTube performing an exorcism to make herself float. Everyone thinks it's fake, but they decide to perform an exorcism anyway. Brad is unconvinced, asking for a sexual favor from Amber in case their exorcism fails. Amber agrees, and Rory becomes the subject of their ill-advised exorcism. Patrick seems worried about his brother as the group moves forward with their plan. The group prepares to form an exorcism on Rory. Amber leads this poorly managed exorcism, instructing the others on the ritual process. Meanwhile, Rory farts and everyone breaks into laughter. Nobody takes the procedure seriously, but Amber continues until they all eventually lift Rory with their fingers. Suddenly, Rory floats on their fingers, while the electrical components in the room start to buzz and short circuit. Everyone is slightly confused at first, but sees that Rory pees himself, now making fun of the situation. Amber believes that the exorcism was not a failure, but everyone sides with Brad and jokes about their bet prior. The nameless girl leaves, but Patrick follows after her. Patrick tries to make her stay, offering pancakes as they sober up from their drinks. The two then sit in the jungle gym, starting to open up. They both have fathers that left them as children, resenting their respective fathers for being careless and selfish. The nameless girl then asks about Rory, concerned for his safety since he got up and left. Patrick dismisses any need for worry, but she eventually convinces him they should check up anyway. Patrick goes back inside to look for Rory. Meanwhile, everyone is still partying and playing around inside. Patrick is still searching for Rory when he eventually finds him in a bathroom. Approaching his brother to see what's wrong, Rory turns around and tries to slash Patrick in a strange fit of rage. Rory is immensely pale and looking possessed, so Patrick picks him up and forces him into another room to set him down on a bed. The two then inspect Rory, Patrick pulling out a flashlight and handing it over to the nameless girl. They notice that Patrick does not look unhealthy at all, and it becomes clear that they need to exorcise Rory properly with the help of a priest. Patrick does not want to affect his image with the priest, hesitating to call Father Conway. Suddenly, Rory pounces on Patrick, and the door closes on its own, making a sound loud enough for even Amber to notice in another room. Patrick and the nameless girl have Rory bound to the bed. After persistent efforts by the girl to have Patrick call the priest, he finally dials up Father Conway. He leaves a message asking for help while trying to save face. Now both go to the rest of the group, discussing what happened to Rory. No one takes them seriously, but the two insist they are experiencing something supernatural. Brad hears from Patrick that Father Conway should be on his way to the asylum, furious at the duo for calling an adult when there's so many illegal. They argue for a bit when suddenly Greer pops out from a window, startling everyone, especially the nameless girl. Greer walks in and immediately notices something that should involve the cops, threatening to call the authorities. The group tries to leave, but he uses his gun to threaten them into staying. While the argument continues, Greer hears Rory from upstairs. He follows the sound upstairs, threatening the group to stay away from him as he does so. Greer walks through the corridor, his gun set up for him to shoot. He eventually finds a door at the end of a corridor. He sees Rory unconscious in the middle of the room, tied to a bed. Thinking Rory is, he approaches him slowly and sits beside him on the bed. The group is waiting outside, trying to hear what might happen. Greer is tying something around the bed's railing, only for the possessed Rory to pounce at him from behind and twist his neck 180 degrees. Greer walks out with his neck still twisted. The group sees this unnatural feat of flexibility before them, now horrified. Greer then falls to his feet and accidentally shoots in the head, smearing blood all across the people, the walls, and the ceiling. Horrified, Brad and Amber run for it, heading into the car and driving out. Meanwhile, Father Conway is outside the facility. He looks at the building from the outside, as it seems he has bad memories attached to it. The drunken couple is still driving around Exeter, unaware of the outside world as they shout like maniacs. They crash into Father Conway, now panicking even more. They pull the car into the driveway to inspect the damage. Brad admits to doing no wrong as everyone starts to lose composure. Brad blames Patrick for their situation as they call Father Conway, as Rory is responsible for ending Greer's life. The choice is between hiding the body in their hands or going to jail. Completely broken down, Amber reaches into the car for the priest's cross. She moves in a way that causes the car's horn to go off, startling everyone and angering Brad even more. Now they all have to plan out their next set of actions. Brad suggests that the group disperse and hide the evidence, leaving the priest dismembered, with body parts scattered across town. Patrick offers a much simpler alternative, cleaning up the place and hiding the evidence. Everyone starts decontaminating the place. They remove the bodies properly and discard every piece of incriminating evidence, now in a hurry to get the job done quickly. Patrick returns to see Rory, who is moving erratically, still tied to the bed. The nameless girl is wandering around Exeter. She walks across the corridors and reaches a loom leading into the attic. She climbs through a hatch and enters the attic. Downstairs, Patrick is with the still possessed Rory. He reassures his brother that everything will be fixed, despite the predicament that everyone is currently in. The nameless girl reads a book in the attic when Patrick climbs through the hatch, startling her. She calls Patrick over to talk about one specific patient, Devon Ryer. Devon Ryer was a 14-year-old admitted into Exeter. The document also reveals that Father Conway managed the patient's data. Patrick takes over and reveals more about the patient. They find that Devon was the psycho responsible for the fire from the prior burning of the facility. They also find a tape, possibly able to give more answers about what is happening to Rory. They play the tape, with Father Conway describing Devon's condition. Devon has some innate abilities, capable of changing people's wills and moving objects with his mind. Devon eventually goes out of control, and the tape ends with Devon proclaiming the fiery doom of the facility. Suddenly, all the locks in the building begin to slam shut, making a loud noise. Patrick returns to everyone else to inspect the situation, realizing the place is sealing them inside. The group tries to exit through the main door, but their efforts yield no results. They return to the main hall, where Brad believes Patrick is responsible for locking everyone inside. However, Patrick cannot explain all of these strange occurrences, but Brad is desperate for some logical explanation of all their situation. All of a sudden, a sound from upstairs catches their attention. Everyone goes to the room where Rory should be tied up. However, Rory is now missing. They look for their missing possessed victim. Everyone is on edge in this situation. Even the slightest interactions cause them distress. They eventually reach a closed door, suspecting that Rory might be on the other side. They open the door to find a room with chairs oddly arranged in a circle. They look around carefully, but start to joke about Rory's condition. Patrick insists that possession is responsible for everything, while Brad tries to be more logical and blames everything. As the jokes continue, they eventually walk back to the room with the bed, with something on the roof immediately catching their attention. Rory is floating against the ceiling, making his possession even more evident. Brad, with his beliefs completely crushed, is trembling and shivering with a cross in his hands. Meanwhile, Amber is explaining some things about possessions through her phone. They conclude that a demon is possessing Rory due to their reckless exorcism. Brian searches again and finds a sketchy do-it-yourself guide for an exorcism. The group looks for everything they can use for an exorcism around the abandoned facility. They find Bibles, crosses, and anything else. With everything now in one room, Rory is tied up against the bed again. They prepare the room, placing Bible pages against the wall and lighting candles. They follow the joke do-it-yourself guide, listening to it religiously instead of questioning its reliability. Brad also prepares a marshmallow, spiking it to incapacitate Rory, hopefully. He takes the marshmallow and tries to feed Rory, slowly approaching his mouth with the spoon. Rory reluctantly takes a bite, but spits it all out on Brad, closing the door with his mind. The group realizes that they need holy water, but have no way to get it. They eventually realize the priest should have some, so Patrick rushes to the garage. They all follow after, but find that the priest is missing. They eventually find a bottle of holy water in the priest's bag. Drew takes a sip, and possibly contaminates it before handing it over to Patrick. Rory is now reacting to something, growling loud enough for the rest to hear downstairs. Everyone returns to the room to deal with Rory, while Brian seems to think it is a reasonable time for him to film an exorcism. Patrick starts reading out of the Bible to exorcise Rory, while Rory appears to be chanting some threatening verses. As Patrick recites more from the Bible, objects in the room start to move on their own, and a strong wind seems to pass through the room. As the exorcism continues, the room begins to shatter, with more and more objects breaking and falling out of place. Eventually, Rory escapes one side of the rope binding him, trying to reach for Patrick to stop the exorcism. Patrick keeps going, reciting the Bible verses and splashing the holy water over Rory, until Rory finally falls flat on the bed. The exorcism ends, and everything in the room goes back to normal. Patrick goes forward to see if his brother is okay, trying to see if the exorcism has worked, but Rory is unresponsive. Drew decides to jump on Rory, slapping and kissing him repeatedly until Rory finally gets up, now normal. Patrick embraces his brother, glad that the exorcism worked. He realizes that Rory believes that he hates him. Patrick is shocked by what Rory thinks of him, embracing him again in relief. However, Rory starts to change back, clawing into Patrick's back until Patrick distances himself. Rory pounces at him, forcing Patrick onto the ground and immediately stabbing Brian with a spoon. Brian pulls the spoon out, and Patrick forces Rory onto the bed again. Rory is now bound to two poles. No one can explain why the exorcism did not work. Using morons in the room do not realize that an exorcism from a YouTube tutorial should not be usable. Suddenly, the laptop downstairs plays rock music. The group follows the sound back to their makeshift living room. Shutting down the music, Brian sits down and grabs a drink, but immediately spits it out after seeing writing on the ceiling. Someone from beyond the world of the living is trying to talk to them. Drew is frustrated with their situation, now berating the spirit haunting them. In response to his insults, the spirit tries to end Drew's life using a bowling ball that breaks through the ceiling. Shaken up, the group finally agrees that they should just listen to the spirit and see what they can learn about it. The group now prepares a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit. Patrick has a bad feeling about indulging further in communicating and interacting with people from beyond the grave, but the nameless girl is insistent that communicating is imperative. Meanwhile, a camera looks over Rory in the other room, providing a feed for the group to watch safely. With the Ouija board ready, Amber and the nameless girl lead the way as they communicate with the spirit, first revealing its presence. The spirit identifies as the child from the files, Devon. Devon wants the group to find him, his location being a box. The group needs clarification, but they do not get the opportunity to think, as the spirit repeatedly demands that they help it. The glass shatters, and the group hears a scream from Rory's room, the possessed boy now not visible in the camera feed. Everyone leaves to check on Rory, besides Brad and Amber, who stay behind. Rory's room is in complete disarray, everything floating, including Rory. Amber smears blood over the Ouija board and draws a crescent, suddenly stopping the strange floating phenomenon in the room. Rory is suddenly back in control of his body, confused with his current situation. With no memory of what happened during his possession, Rory seems to have fully regained consciousness and control over his body, so Patrick frees his brother, and the group now leaves to find Amber and Brad. The group cannot find the couple at first, searching throughout the building, but they eventually see Brad inside the kitchen, facing away from Amber, who seems to be doing something at the kitchen counter. The nameless girl approaches Amber, only for her to turn around and reveal that she is another victim of possession. She attacks the nameless girl, but misses and walks toward Brad, pushing him aside. She leaves the room, only to return and surprise Brian by immediately stabbing him. She then changes targets to Drew, pouncing at him and tossing him onto a foosball table. She then jumps on him and starts gnawing at his face. Brad finally takes action, using a disinfectant spray to burn Amber's eyes and force her to take off. The group is finally able to subdue Amber. They first check on Brian, who has a stab wound in his torso. Brian is angry and frustrated, completely fed up with how this party is turning into a bloodbath. The group then looks at Drew, who is in worse condition, cowering at the foosball table. Amber pulls his tongue out and tosses it aside, blood pouring out of Drew's mouth. Drew is in anguish, but his pain ends with a chandelier dropping over him and splitting him in two. Realizing that their lives are now at stake, Patrick is going through tools to help find a way outside. Brad cannot handle the situation anymore, so he takes a pickaxe and leaves alone. Patrick leads what is left of the team with a makeshift weapon, trying to find an exit. Everyone has something equipped as they go through corridors. They eventually reach the kitchen again, where Patrick asks Brian to try to pry the windows open, leaving to look for an exit upstairs. They cannot proceed, as Rory protests going back. He does not want to risk experiencing anything else as traumatizing as the possessions again. Patrick does not want to leave his brother behind, but hands him a cleaver and assigns him as Brian's guard, taking this opportunity to apologize to Rory. The two brothers take a moment to appreciate each other. Patrick then leaves with the nameless girl to find an exit. Patrick and the nameless girl find Greer's body, missing a finger. The missing finger leaves a blood trail, so the two follow it to find answers. Meanwhile, Rory decides to leave Brian on his own. Patrick and the nameless girl reach a door, where the blood trail ends. Patrick tries to force the door open by hurling himself at it. He does not bother to check if the door opens the other way, so the nameless girl pulls the door open, saving the two from wasting more time and alerting the roaming spirit in Amber. Inside the room, the cut-off finger is pointing at a wooden cupboard. They decide to look inside, bracing for something to be inside. Opening the cupboard door alerts Amber, who is in the corridor, screaming. Patrick and the nameless girl think Amber will probably come to them, so they hide inside the cupboard behind layers of hung clothes. Amber looks around, but cannot find anyone outside the cupboard. She stares through a hole in the closet, suspecting that there might be someone inside. Suddenly, she claws into the closet, grabbing onto everything she finds inside. She misses the two captives, eventually leaving without making any more victims. Rory is walking around in the corridors of Exeter. With his cleaver still equipped, the boy gets distracted by a spider until someone grabs him and takes him with them. The nameless girl and Patrick leave the cupboard after Amber departs. They notice markings on the ground, alluding to a possible passage behind the large piece of furniture. Patrick slides the cupboard over, revealing a metallic door. Inside, they find what seems to be Devon's room. There are messages and engravings all across the wall. They eventually stumble into a crescent, now a stable image, as they deal with Devon's spirit. They keep looking around until they find a cross. The cross flips over the revealed paper jammed inside a crack in the wall. Patrick opens the bundle of papers from the wall and inspects them individually. He first sees a picture of himself, followed by a picture of Father Conway with a woman, until he sees the last sheet of paper, a supposed letter from Devon. Devon reveals in the paper that Father Conway is his biological father, a piece of information Patrick does not accept. Patrick holds Father Conway in such high esteem that he is unwilling to assume that the man he works for might also have his sins. Amber crawls through the corridors, looking for the remaining group members. Brian notices that Rory has left him alone, so he leaves the kitchen and looks for the young boy. Unable to find him, he eventually reaches the room with the Ouija board, apparently finding some new information relevant to the crescent. He calls for Patrick and makes his way back into the corridor. The nameless girl and Patrick are climbing a staircase when suddenly, a toilet roll tumbles down the stairs. They follow the paper into a room with several bathtubs. They look for exits inside, until the nameless girl finds a vent exposing cold air. The nameless girl climbs into the vent to search for an exit, despite Patrick hesitating to follow along. She climbs in and searches through the vents. As she crawls through, something jumps in front of the nameless girl, startling her and Patrick outside. She realizes it is a cat, calming them both down. Patrick decides to look around the room. He walks around the room and eventually finds a bathtub with Amber's bra floating on the surface. Fishing it out, Amber suddenly appears behind him and tries to drown him inside the tub. The nameless girl reaches her in time, saving Patrick, but now falling victim to Amber's attacks. Patrick gets out of the bathtub as the girls fight. The nameless girl finds a fire extinguisher, uses it against Amber, and makes it rain dry ice. As the two girls fight, Patrick grabs two toothbrushes and stabs Amber in the eyes. The possessed woman struggles, until she pulls the toothbrushes from her skull and continues attacking Patrick. The nameless girl finds a metal rod and uses it to stab through Amber's head, now incapacitating her. Patrick comforts the nameless girl, only for Amber to get back up and jump at him from behind. Using a shower curtain, they force Amber away, until Patrick uses the fire extinguisher to smash Amber's head into smithereens. Brad is traversing through the building, complaining about the facility, still looking for an exit. He eventually finds the control room. Playing around with the switches, he causes a short circuit and loses composure for a second. He picks up his dropped phone, only to get startled by Father Conway appearing before him. He tries to run away, but trips at the door frame and falls on his pickaxe. He stands up one last time, revealing the pickaxe piercing his chest. Father Conway shows no change in expression, looking at the young man with disappointment until he performs a Christian ritual on Brad for putting a soul to rest. Patrick and the nameless girl find that Brian and Rory are missing. They look for them inside the facility, until they find Brian's iPad on a piano. The iPad contains Brian's last recorded message explaining the crescent. As the two watch the video, Brian rushes toward them with an axe. Brian has fallen victim to the same possession as the others, now relentlessly trying to end Patrick and the nameless girl. The nameless girl gets one shot at Brian with a cleaver, but Patrick gets a clean cut through Brian's face, splitting it in two. Brian collapses, only to get back up and grab onto the nameless girl's leg. Patrick finally grabs onto the axe, using it to slash through the possessed man and end his suffering. Both of them now leave Brian behind and search for Rory. They keep looking through different rooms, until they find one with a large wooden chest against the wall. The chest seems to hold someone inside, apparently shaking again and again, as if someone is trying to push it open from inside. Patrick and the nameless girl open the chest, letting Rory out. Rory explains that Father Conway placed him inside, but is interrupted by the nameless girl, who finds another crescent drawn on the wall. Now shaken up, the group identifies the box Devon has been asking the group to look for. She then explains that Devon never lost his life, the spirit possession just being a part of his transformation. Suddenly, they hear the buzzing of electricity from outside, so they make their way over to the source of the sound. They find Brad's body on the floor. Patrick throws his jacket over Brad, and the remainder of the group enters the control room. They play around with the switches as the nameless girl goes to another room to see if any switches open the window. One of the switches finally opens their path to freedom, but Father Conway grabs onto the nameless girl and pushes her down. Father Conway forces her on the ground, but she bites her way out of the priest's clutches and gets away. Patrick runs to the window with Rory. Before searching for the nameless girl, he fulfills his responsibility as an older brother and lets Rory escape through the window before going after the girl. Patrick eventually finds her, the two embracing in their relief. Suddenly, Father Conway knocks Patrick out from behind a wall. The nameless girl runs away, but the priest catches her again. He pushes her down and stabs her in the knee. She grabs onto a rod and forces her way out of the priest's clutches again. Struggling to walk, the nameless girl leaves the room, only for Father Conway to reach for her in the corridor. He slams her against empty metallic drums, before she takes a fuel container and smacks the priest in the head. The two persist as the nameless girl finally tosses the canister on the priest, its contents spilling all over him. Patrick finally regains consciousness, making his way toward the nameless girl. She tries to lock herself inside a cell, but Father Conway holds the door open and eventually gets inside. The two continue their fight inside, until the priest is now stuck, while the nameless girl leaves the cell. Patrick finally reaches the girl, but Father Conway stabs her in the chest, condemning her to hell. The nameless girl stays on her feet momentarily, before collapsing and seeing the end of her days. Patrick is shaken up by the loss of this woman whose name he does not know, but he quickly gives up on grieving the loss and goes after Father Conway. Father Conway is kneeling in prayer inside the cell. Patrick is angered severely by the priest's actions, now willing to forsake the man he held in such high esteem. Upon the priest forsaking Devon, Patrick decides to end the religious man's life with the very thing a priest strives to avoid in the afterlife: flames. Patrick tosses the lighter to the fuel-soaked priest, burning him down completely. Patrick walks back to the nameless girl's body, still trying to collect himself as he grieves the many lives lost that day. The lifeless body drops a bracelet. The bracelet spells out a name, Devon. The girl suddenly returns to life, now revealing herself as Devon, responsible for everything that happened at Exeter. Father Conway abandoned Devon and her mother. Her mother shot her in the presence of baby Devon, leaving the family forever scarred. As a teenager, Devon tried to get help from Father Conway at Exeter, but Father Conway never accepted her. Devon then finally decided to use the opportunity at Exeter to manipulate Patrick into finishing off Father Conway. Devon's reveal explains everything that has led up to the current moment, with the nameless girl being knowledgeable about Devon beyond what the group found, and her also being the one to expose Devon's files to the rest of the group. Devon's anger for her father led to immense suffering for Patrick and all his friends. Patrick is still confused by everything, but he seems to submit to his guilt for not being considerate of Devon and everyone else from the beginning. With many having lost their lives, Patrick is about to accept his fate, but one look at Rory shouting from the window pushes Patrick to make one final stand for the sake of his brother and himself. They fight, exchanging blows and using different weapons to try to end each other. Devon tries her luck with lawn shears, but Patrick subdues her and gets a clean hit with a sharp piece of metal. The fire from Patrick's encounter with Father Conway spreads in the building as the brawl continues. Devon finally realizes she has superpowers, now using them to her advantage. She starts a lawnmower and tries to push Patrick inside the machine's blade. Patrick resists long enough until Rory pushes her aside. Patrick recovers and uses the lawnmower against Devon, chopping off her hands and turning them into mincemeat. The attack does not stop as Patrick finds the same lawn shears and stabs the superhuman before him. Devon drops inside the metal chest Rory was locked in, now sealed inside with chains. The brother locks her inside the chest in the burning building, and they now start to run out together. The fires have gone out, and Patrick sits with his brother as they finally find peace after a long day. Rory tries to take a puff from and the two agree that they do not need to discuss anything from today with their mother.